Hello everybody, Thersites the Historian here, and today we're discussing the novel Roadwork by Stephen King. This is one of the 4 or so books that he wrote under the name of Richard Bachman. And unlike The Long Walk, which was written while King was still in college, this was something that King wrote around 1980 when he had a fair amount of experience under his belt already. And it really shows here everything about Roadwork is more mature than the work that he did on The Long Walk. The themes are darker in the sense of really exploring the depths of someone's soul. We see what rock bottom looks like. He really explores the depths of depression here. He sort of takes us through a complete mental breakdown over time. There's a lot going on here and a lot to unpackage. So once again, to just discuss this whole issue of King's use of the pseudonym Richard Bachman and why he did it, my working hypothesis is that Bachman is basically Stephen King's asshole Republican side with a fetish for human suffering. And I think that maybe in King's imagination he wonders, had things in his life been different if he would have become someone with the sort of outlook of a Richard Bachman. At any rate, the main character in the novel is Bart Dawes. He is 40 years old and he is a laundry executive. He runs like a large industrial laundry operation. He lives in a Midwestern city that isn't really named, but could be anything from like Detroit to Minneapolis to Cleveland to probably some Midwestern city, I get the impression. I mean, it's not really specified, but we do know that there's winter weather there that's pretty intense. And it's also clear from the context that he's not talking about a place like New York or Chicago or something that's, really well known. So Dawes and his wife had been married for a while, and they had been happy until a few years before when their son had contracted brain cancer and died. And the wife shows obvious outward signs of depression, but Bart has sort of internalized it, and now it's really getting to him. And what this book essentially is the tracking of when he goes from being functional but deeply depressed and a little bit deranged to going full-blown postal. And the immediate catalyst, as the name Roadwork implies, is that there's going to be an interstate extension in his city, and it will not only require his workplace to be demolished and relocated, but also his home. And keep in mind, this is the neighborhood that he's lived in basically his entire adult life. So as soon as he got out of high school, he moved to this area, and he's been there. And he feels like basically that the government is taking away everything in his life, everything he's got left, the places that he was with his son Charlie at. So the playgrounds he took Charlie to, the house that he lived in that he built with his wife and all that kind of stuff. And at first we see that he's got a lot of responsibility as the deadline is approaching and he needs to relocate, and he decides not to. And things come to a head at some point like late November, early December, when he misses a deadline to sign a lease for his new factory, and he ends up quitting / getting fired, depending on how you interpret it, by his company. And after that, it's straight downhill. And even before that, there were signs of a breakdown, and he purchased some firearms. So after that, his wife gets really freaked out, and she also knows that he's not going to get them another house, so she moves back in with their parents. And basically for the next 2 months or so, Dawes is riding around in his car in the middle of the energy crisis. The book is actually set in the early 70s, despite the fact that King wrote around 1980. And he is, more or less without aim. He doesn't really know what he's doing, but he does know that he wants to strike out in some way. And he knows that life as he knows it is over. And he has opportunities to get back on his feet, not only before, where he could have signed the lease for that and then gotten himself another house with the settlement from the state government, or maybe it's federal, I don't know, it's never really specified. Or maybe it's a city, hell, I don't remember the detail there. But at any rate, he didn't. and it just sort of compounds over time. And I think that's one of the more brilliant parts of this, is that we see that one decision has consequences for everything else, and it follows a chain. And this sort of crazy train that Dawes rides on, there are plenty of times where he could have gotten off. Up until the end, there are plenty of opportunities for him to change course and do something else, and he never takes it. So, of course, predictably, there ends with a confrontation, since a lot of the plot is him, preparing for some sort of confrontation. The part where he buys guns is pretty early on, and it's definitely, it doesn't. I don't think that me telling you that actually ruins anything, though, because it's well done enough that even if you knew every plot point, it's still worth reading. So the best parts, the brilliant parts here, I really like how King manages to rationalize that kind of irrational attachment that people have to their homes, or that irrational sense of identity that, for me, doesn't really make a lot of sense. But when King explains it in terms of how Dawes feels towards his neighborhood, in that case, it makes it very clear and very relatable. He also creates a really believable psyche or mindset for Dawes, both in terms of Dawes's outlook on life in general and the evolution of his thought. Because though it's clear that he's kind of crazy and that he's snapped, there's still enough reason there and enough of a connection in the way that he thinks that you can still follow what he's trying to do. And even his last symbolic gesture at the end is something that you can understand from his perspective. Even though it's clear that if you didn't know what was going on inside of his head, that this would all seem to be completely irrational and unrelatable. And even to his wife, it's clear that she doesn't know quite what's going on in his head, and we can see kind of what she does know based on the way it's put together. Also, that scene where he quits his job and then has a confrontation with his boss, who is like this corporate head who runs several different operations in the city. That's a brilliant scene. That's one of the best quitting scenes, and then rants about how corporations suck that I've ever read. And I mean, if you know me, you know that I really hate corporations, so I enjoyed every second of that. It's just the way that he sees the world is very believable for someone who's like a 40-year-old laundry executive who rose from these blue-collar roots and, was a man of the early 70s, had some definite racist views. Like, he drops the N-bomb casually a bunch of times, and, makes comments about Nixon which are sort of neutral. Whereas, he can understand why people voted for him. Maybe he did too, but he also, at this point, understands, because of the ongoing Watergate investigation, that Nixon is not that great. Also, the energy crisis is something that he sort of blames on Nixon a bit too. So anyway, the other characteristic of Dawes that I like, that I guess is a thing that you see with quite a number of King characters, is that he is a superb ranter. And a lot of these rants are inside of his head. Others are just delivered, though, in real life, and these sort of mark Dawes' breakdown in the eyes of everyone else. But the rants just on their own, even where I think that, he's not really talking sensibly, they're still great. I don't know why, but they're still fascinating, and you just want to listen and hear more. So in other words, it's the exact opposite of all of the speeches in Ayn Rand books. Also, his acts of defiance, both in terms of the dramatic acts that he does, I won't spoil those, and then the acts where he, gets into arguments with his friends or coworkers or whatever, those are all very believable, and they all make total sense within the context that King created about, Dawes' mental state and the development of that. The other thing that I really, really liked is that once Dawes comes to his final act, it has been completely demystified and unromanticized. And we know exactly why he's doing what he's doing, and we know that there's not a greater principle involved. We know that there's not some sort of abstract symbolic meaning attached. We just know that this is the final act of someone who has reached absolute rock bottom and has no desire to go on. And for whatever reason, because of how we followed this character, that works brilliantly. I can't really imagine this ending any other way. And usually when you have a complete and total ending like this, you might feel a little bit cheated or wonder, well, what if this person had done this? But in this case, no. It's a fully satisfying experience from cover to cover, and it leaves nothing left to change. I wouldn't change this at all if I were, say, adapting this into a screenplay or whatever. It's easily one of the best 5 novels I've ever read. I would say it's a pretty compelling portrait of a middle-class life and the mores of the early 70s. I didn't live during that time, but certainly the way that King presents it in this book seems convincing enough. And it really brought it to life for me. So if I had to rate Roadwork, I would give this a 5 out of 5, and I would recommend this book to literally anyone without reservation, unless you are completely lame and horrible. So anyway, remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Click the notification bell, all of that stuff, and I will see you around with more videos of various kinds, including more book reviews.